more to this complex woman than the men she entangled herself with. She came from humble origins, born on June 13, 1839, in Toxteth, Liverpool. The third of 5 children, she grew up in the Liverpool area, near the city's docks where her father worked. Her working-class family was not well off, residing in a shoddy tenement building. Tragedy undoubtedly marked Catherine's youth, since she grew up motherless. Walter's mother was Mary Ann Fowler, who had immigrated from Ireland. She gave birth to 2 more children after Catherine, but sadly, she did not survive to raise her children, dying in childbirth before Catherine was even 12 years old. Her father wasn't much help, proving to be a bad father figure. Walter's old man was a customs official at the Liverpool city docks, and later an innkeeper who seemed more interested in his work than raising his children. He was also an alcoholic. This likely resulted in Catherine's strong sense of independence at a young age. Indeed, she started working early, and a paycheck wasn't the only thing she got from her newfound employment. She also received a fun nickname. Shortly after entering the workforce at age 16, Catherine became known as Skittles. This nickname would end up sticking with her for the rest of her life, and is even how her later wealthy benefactors and the press would refer to her. The charming nickname suited Walter's fun personality, and it took appropriate inspiration from a game. The most wildly accepted legend for how Walters got her nickname is a simple but fun one. She got a job working at the Blackjack Tavern in Liverpool. The pub had a reputation around town for a unique feature. It had a bowling alley. In those days, however, bowling took its name from the pins a player would attempt to knock over, the Skittles. Thus, Walters got her lifelong name of Skittles from her tenure there. She would soon get her lifelong profession there too, and it certainly wasn't waitressing. She was discovered young. While working at the bar, Walters caught the attention of a wealthy aristocrat, George Lord Fitzwilliam. Fitzwilliam immediately grew infatuated with the 16-year-old and eventually convinced Walters to allow him to whisk her back home with him to live as his mistress. It was an agreement that would change her life forever. Quickly, she got whisked away to the capital. Fitzwilliam brought Walters back to London, his primary place of residence. He set her up in a modest home of her own, where he would call on her from time to time. Their relationship didn't last too long, but it was still incredibly lucrative for Walters. After parting ways, Lord Fitzwilliam agreed to settle their affair with a £2,000 one-off payment and a £300 annual pension in exchange for her discretion. How could he say no to such a pretty face? However, her beauty was a matter of opinion. Catherine Walters' looks have been the subject of some debate. Some consider her not to have been a classic beauty, with one journalist even going so far as to say she had an exceedingly plain face. Still, she is generally thought of as quite pretty in her youth, with chestnut hair and blue eyes, but it was not her face that transfixed most of her suitors. Her figure was legendary. While opinions differed on Walter's beauty above the neck, it was her body that attracted near-universal attention from men. Described as having a perfect figure, Walters possessed an 18-inch waist. She would lean into this asset by wearing figure-hugging clothing, and this gained her many quarters over the years. But her personality attracted many too, her character shining bright. Walter's lovers appreciated her for her warm personality. One regular romantic partner, diarist and member of Parliament, Henry Lebouchier, gushed about her in his diary, saying she had "the most capricious heart I know, and must be the only whore in history to retain her heart intact." Walters fit the stereotype of possessing a heart of gold, and it earned her a very impressive list of liaisons. Her lover list was varied. Rumors abound around all the lovers Walters took over her lifetime. Not every name has surfaced, but most of her benefactors came from areas of the upper classes. The known list includes prominent aristocrats, political leaders, notable intellectuals, and even a member of the British royal family. Some of these men would have more influence on the direction of her life than others, especially when she got entangled with a married man. In the early 1860s, Catherine Walters became the mistress of Spencer Cavendish, Marquis of Hartington, and the future 8th Duke of Devonshire. She was just 19 years old, and the already married Marquis, known as Hardy Tardy, ordained himself her protector. Their affair would last 4 years, and Walters benefited greatly from it in life-altering ways. Cavendish gave Walters a generous allowance with which to cover her expenses and set her up in a lavish townhouse in Mayfair. The grounds of the house included a stable with a team of thoroughbred horses. It was the latter bestowment that would come to define her public persona in London. She had a special talent. Outside of her private life as a courtesan, Walters became known wildly as an exceptional talented equestrian. Indeed, she became renowned as much for her horsemanship as she was for her physical attractiveness. Her accomplishments gained her a reputation even beyond Britain's capital. She drew in huge audiences. Walters gained fame for exercising thoroughbred horses as a horsebreaker in Road and Row Hyde Park, London. Such was her notoriety that she became a tourist attraction, and crowds of sightseers would flock to the park to watch her riding. This gained her a massive influence as she influenced horse riding. Walters' unmatched skills on a horse inspired many of aristocrat ladies to imitate her riding style. She became known as a trendsetter in the field of horsemanship. Her competency in the saddle only grew as a spectacle to behold. The crowd found her electrifying. A letter written to the Times in July 1862 illustrated the ecstatic atmosphere that Walters' talent would aspire at riding events. She threads her way dexterously with an unconscious air through the throng commented upon by the hundreds who admire and the hundreds who envy her. She was the star of the show. Performing under the name Anamina, Walters would speed around in a carriage drawn by handsome ponies, leaving other participants in the dust. Dozens would gather around her carriage after the event to congratulate her, and she would graciously accept their praise in her signature pork pie hat. Her clothing was nearly as legendary as her riding. She was a loyal customer and knew where to shop. Walters got all her riding habits from a famous London tailor, Henry Poole & Co. She made so many orders that ledgers recording her purchases alone amounted to over 40 pages. Walters preferred her pieces to be made with black beaver fur lined in silk with velvet collars. Her riding habits were as trend-setting as her riding skills, but no one wore their habit quite like Walters. She dressed enticingly. Walters' riding habits were infamously tight-fitting, showing off her legendary figure. There were rumors that she achieved such a dramatic fit by having her tailors sew her into her habits. There were also whispers that she didn't wear any undergarments beneath them, no doubt increasing her appeal among her male fans. But her time as a popular spectacle would not last forever. Walters began to grow weary of London for a number of reasons. Her infamy brought her some grief from some of the aristocrat ladies who scorned her publicly. Additionally, her relationship with Cavendish had come to an end. This was not a financial burden to Walters, however. On the contrary, Lord Hartington agreed to pay her $2,000 annually to keep their affair under wraps. This set her up financially for life, even beyond his. Amazingly, she did receive payment from beyond the grave. Even after the now Duke Cavendish passed away in 1908, his family continued to pay Walters her yearly $2,000 sum. This was likely due to the Duke obscuring the transaction under a false pretense in his ledgers. With her finances secured and her disdain for London reaching a fever pitch, Walters set out to unburden herself of her possessions. With the intentions of traveling abroad, Walters sold the lease of her London home. She sold everything she owned. She auctioned every piece of furniture and decoration in the house to secure some extra cash for her journey. With this taken care of, She just needed to secure a travel companion. While he was visiting London, Aubrey de Verbo, clerk of Artgolis Castle in County Down, Ireland, became acquainted with Walters and immediately grew smitten with her. There was only one problem. He had a wife. Expressing her intentions to travel, the couple eloped to New York City together. She would only end up staying in the city and in the relationship for around a year, however. But Walters sought to relocate somewhere a little more befitting of her sultry personality. From the USA, she moved to Europe. Walters up and left New York and headed for Paris. Here she added another notch to her impressive belt of important men coming under the patronage of Achille Fouda. Fouda was the finance minister for the then reigning emperor Napoleon III. But liaisons with important men were not all she pursued in the City of Light. Seemingly struck by an entrepreneurial spirit, Walters decided to open a salon in Paris. Not much information has surfaced about it, but as it remained open during her entire stint in the French capital, it was likely reasonably successful. As was the case anywhere she went, Walters quickly developed a notable reputation in Paris as well. She was a spectacle in the streets. Not letting her talents with horses go to waste, Walters gained infamy among Parisians for driving her own carriage through the streets. Holed by two thoroughbreds, one could often see her trembling down the Bois de Boulogne, accompanied by two grooms. Many marveled at the sight, and Walters made sure her skills only improved. She stayed in practice. Walters ended up staying in Paris for 10 years, only returning to Britain on occasion to take part in the hunting season in Leicestershire. During her time abroad, she continued to hone her skills as a horsewoman, and her impressive reputation as such only grew. But not everyone in Paris got on her good side. She brought a publisher to court, records showing that Walters sued a publisher and four while she was living in Paris. He was about to release a book called Mémoires de Homme Biche Anglais, an illegitimate biography of Walters herself. The book cover featured a portrait of her. Fearing the attention it would draw towards her and her secret lovers in the local gossip columns, she sought legal action against four. Before the case went to court, the two agreed to a settlement, and the publisher destroyed the remaining copies of the book. Her luck with literary men was not all bad, however, since she attracted a poet. While in Paris, Walters met the English poet Wilfred Scarne Blunt. The two began a brief affair that resulted in Blunt's own infatuation with her for the rest of his life. She allegedly inspired many of his poems thereafter. It was not only the literature she would inspire, she was the subject of fiction. In 1864, while she was still in Paris, London-based publisher George Vickers put out not one, but 3 fictionalized biographies about Walters. These were less obviously about her than the one threatened by the French publisher, likely explaining why Walters did not dispute their release. Published anonymously, the books caused something of a splash. Her likely author of the fictionalized books about Walters was a man named William Stevens Hayward. The raunchy content of the novels caused a moral concern amongst the conservative literary critique clique, with one reviewer concluding that no respectable bookseller would like his daughter to read them, and no man who values his repute should suffer them to disgrace his shop. But despite the controversy, Walters continued to play the muse for many. When reputation-inspired poetry, Alfred Austin mentioned Walters by name in his 1861 poem, The Season, a satire, a poem poking fun at aristocrat society and the social mores of the mid-Victorian era. Austin waxed about Walters' dramatic horse-riding shows at Hyde Park and the odd inspired in audiences. The poem illustrated other reactions she inspired too. Rich woman resented her. Austin's poem also touched on the prevailing mood among society ladies towards Walters, who were well aware of how she made her living. Not only did Austin imply that Walters inspired jealousy among the well-to-do women, but they also seemed to feel a curious interest and fascination with her life. The men had something of a different opinion. While bred society girls seemed incredibly repressed and boring, in comparison to Walter's more natural social manners and free-spiritedness, which men found irresistible. Ironically, it was the social structures and expectations created by these men that created the stiff, uptight woman they married in the first place. But Walter's charm served her well all the same wherever she went, and she was soon ready to move again. He finally returned home. In 1872, after 10 years in Paris, Walters returned to London, where she would live out the rest of her days. After her success in the French capital, she decided to once again open a salon in her native capital city. Now, at the ripe old age of 33, Walters' primary profession didn't slow down at all, and her contact list grew more impressive still. She was constantly upgrading, leading her into a royal affair. Upon returning to London, Walters linked up with a new gentleman caller whose status put her previous partners to shame. She began a relationship with none other than the Prince of Wales, who would later go on to ascend to the throne as King Edward VII. But the power dynamics between the two were not as you'd expect. The prince had an obsession with her. Despite his status, the Prince of Wales found himself completely infatuated with Walters by the end of their relationship, after which she received yet another generous lifetime annuity. Edward had written her around 300 love letters. Due to her signature discretion, she classically agreed to return all 300 to him, and he was utterly grateful for this gesture. Many loved Walters, but there was one unlikely man who caught her affection. Walters met the Honorable Derailed Summary in 1879 and fell passionately in love with him. They started a sometimes romantic, sometimes platonic relationship that would last the rest of her life. But in true Walters fashion, there was nothing conventional about their partnership. When they met, for example, she was 40 years old, and he was only 19, and still a student at Eton, a constant presence in her life from the moment she met him. Walters even left her entire estate to Sumray upon her demise. Though she'd brought a lawsuit against a publisher a decade previously, in 1873, Catherine Walters ended up being on the receiving end of one. A tailor sued her over a dispute involving her bill. Messrs. Creed and Evans, a tailor specializing in writing habits, sued to recover costs they claimed Walters owed them after she and her sister had disagreed with the prices charged. The sisters, through the lens of our modern values, may have had a point. The reason Walters had kicked up a fuss with the tailors was because of a previously lower charge for similar habits. The tailors countered with an argument that would not hold water today. They claimed the garments were hand-sewn by men, implying male labor was worth more than a woman's. Reflecting the backwards attitude of the time, the jury found in favor of the tailors. Walters' reputation, fortunately, remained untarnished. Walters officially retired from life as a courtesan in 1890 at the age of 51. Never one to simply sit relaxing on a beach, she decided to open 2 hotels to which she could dedicate her newfound free time, one in England and one in France. On August 5, 1920, Walters passed away in her home from a cerebral hemorrhage. The love of her life, Gerald Sumray, had been pushing her in her wheelchair when Walters had her fatal stroke. At the time of her passing, her estate was worth over $2,050, a staggering amount of money for the time and for someone of her origins. To this day, at 15 South Street, where Walters drew her last breath, a royal blue plaque is affixed to the property in her honor. Considering her profession and the conservative attitudes of her time, it is a surprising, though undeniably fitting tribute to an impressive woman who knew how to live life to the fullest. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factsinate, for more incredible facts about everything.